Hello, everyone. Welcome to the I Love Dentistry interview of the month. Today, I'm honored to have Dr. Edward Zuckerburg with me. Many of you have seen him, heard from him. He has been very active in the dental community, going back to decades, when he first became a dentist. And today, we at the I Love Dentistry community have the great pleasure of inviting him and learning from him. So for those of us watching us live, I want to say a big thank you. And for those who are going to watch it 2 weeks from now, or even a month from now, hey, hope you get some valuable tips from this, and hopefully you benefit from it. We would love to hear your comments. Feel free to share it. Feel free to write it in. Looking forward to some engagement from this. So thank you, everyone, for tuning in. Dr. Zuckerburg, welcome. Thank you for taking the time to talk to us today.
Great to be here, and thanks for having me on, Naren.
Absolutely. How are you doing this? Where are you right now, and how are you doing today?
I'm in the Bay Area in California. Currently, we are smoke-free outside, so the air is good and everything's good here. It's
That's great.
Beautiful September day, about 70 degrees with no humidity early in the morning, and going up to about 80. Couldn't ask for more, except the golf course is closed today.
You said the golf course is closed today?
Golf course is closed today, yeah.
Why is it closed?
Monday.
Oh, right. Fair enough. So everyone is, makes sense. Tell us your story. I know some people may know it, some people may not, but nobody can tell your story better than you can. So tell us your story in dentistry and in life in general.
Well, I grew up in Brooklyn, New York, and was a local boy, lived at home, walked to high school, walked to college, and took the subway to NYU Dental School. Lived at home until I got married, right after I graduated dental school, and started my own practice about a year after, a couple of months actually, after completing my general practice residency in dentistry. Started my own practice in Brooklyn that I took over from a dentist who was looking to move upstate New York. So there was a nice nucleus of patients left behind. And about a year after that practice was underway, my wife got into medical school in Westchester County, New York, and we relocated up there. And after commuting for about a year, I decided that I really liked Westchester. And we were able to buy a small home from a retiring dentist with a small office in the house. So for the next 10 years, I ran two practices, the one in Brooklyn, the one in the house in Dobbs Ferry, New York. And after about 5 years, we did a pretty large scale renovation on the house to make it into from a one-chair operatory to a 4-op with a business office and a, ultra high tech for the mid 1980s. I remember walking into an IBM product store that just opened in White Plains. I think it was in 1985. And they had the first IBM PC XT. And I said to my wife, I need that for the office. And it also had a companion dental software package by a company called ORD Systems. And, at that time, I couldn't really say that. I guess that was like the birth of my love affair with technology. And I did not have time. I would have loved to learn some computer programming, but I didn't really have time. My computer programming knowledge was limited to Atari Basic that I learned on my Atari 800 computer. And that I'll never forget that first computer. It was like, by today's standards, a real dinosaur, 512K RAM. I mean, 10 megabyte hard drive. That computer could not hold one picture from my digital camera today. It just didn't have, and it was $5,000, if you could believe it, for that computer. And the dental software package, which was garbage, was another $5,000. I mean, $10,000 was a lot of money for us. back in 1985. I was paying for my wife's medical school education, and making ends meet as a new dentist, and paying for a house with 18% mortgage back in the early 80s. And as much as that computer was a disaster and the dental software was a disaster, it was a valuable experience with technology for me. It let me get in when I bought my next computer and dental practice management software 2 years later. I knew exactly what I wanted, what features in the software that the first system was missing. So it helped me move into technology. And I also learned how to really take a good look at technology and evaluate what would work, what would have good return on investment, and what made sense. So, in the late 80s, I added the first AccuCam intraoral camera system because, obviously a frustration for me and for many dentists, even with good speaking skills, was the ability to convince patients to go ahead with treatment. And so having the tools of being able to demonstrate to them pictures of what's going on in their mouth made life easy. And it was a natural progression for me when digital x-ray became available 10 years later, in the late 90s, to be the first kid on the block to have one of those too. Along the way, air abrasion for my phobic patients, of which my wife, who was a psychiatrist, ultimately left her practice of psychiatry to run everything non-clinical in my office, including working together with me to develop a comprehensive plan to deal with phobic patients. So technology's been a big part of my life. The staff kind of learned to go along with me and nicknamed me Inspector Gadget. Patients were kind of expecting to see what the latest and greatest and newest things were when they came to my office, showing off the new technology and whatnot. And they, I've always been a believer that technology doesn't necessarily make us better dentists, but it certainly gives patients the appearance that we're on the cutting edge, and they learn to respect that and kind of put dentists who embrace technology on a pedestal. So that's why I've always been a big fan of adopting technology once you understand the principles of ROI, and how you see a particular technology fitting into your practice style, just to give your practice a positive image in the light of patients. So, that's a little bit of my early journey with technology and dentistry. From 1990 on, when I sold my office in Brooklyn, I focused on full-time practice out of my home-based practice in Dobbs Ferry, New York. It allowed me to have a lot of family time, eliminating a commute. Dinner was always family style, with discussions of everyone discussing what happened in our day. And having the office downstairs enabled me to go back down after everyone to sleep. I was a late bird and didn't really need more than about 5-6 hours of sleep. So it was not unusual for me to be in the office from 10:30 till 1, reading notes, doing insurance forms, handling the events of the day that could not be handled with tons of distractions.
Right. So did you block off some family time between a certain hour to certain hours, so you do get to spend the time with your wife, your kids?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, my wife worked in the office, so we had lunch together every day, and we had many, time for many chats, whatnot. We were basically with each other all the time. Tried to end practice at 5 o'clock, although we did maintain 2 late night weeks till 7 for patients who, needed late hours. The way we handled that is we would work a split schedule. A lot of our employees were local and they loved it. We'd work like on Monday, like an 8 to 12, 3 to 7 day. And that gave my wife and I a chance for a leisurely lunch and exercise, walk, or bike ride. You can do a lot in 3 hours in the middle of the day. And with that commute removed from your life, it's wonderful. When my wife was in medical school, and then we had our first two children while she was in medical school. And then when she went back to her practice of psychiatry, I would have hygiene patients scheduled from 3 to 4, but I didn't see any patients from 3 to 4 because I wanted to be there to greet them when they came home off the bus and, find out a little bit about their day, deal with any crises, that kind of thing. Once my wife came home, she handled that part and I went back to the grind, but we never missed a first or a second grade play or anything of that. There's just so many advantages to having a home-based practice for family life, and problems too. So being an early adopter, that meant insurance claim processing was done online in our office in the early 90s. Credit card processing, things of that nature all required bandwidth, which back in the early 1990s, everything was done via phone lines.
Right.
And
the AOL dial tone, right? The dial tone.
Yeah. I mean, we had America Online like everybody else, and I think it was around 95, I want to say. My staff started to notice that they had trouble getting credit card claim processing and insurance claim processing after 3 o'clock. And it didn't take a rocket scientist to figure out that my kids were coming home and tying up the internet and using that line. So first we started with a DSL line, which freed up the line and gave a dedicated computer line. But the bandwidth we had all our operatories linked together by then. And my older kids had computers in their room. The bandwidth with a DSL line was not quite good enough to handle. So I bit the bullet and had a T1 line put into the house. A neighbor's friend had a fledgling computer business. They ran I think it was Cat 4 cable throughout the house back then. So we had pretty much broadband in 1995, 96, when most other homes had, if they were lucky, had one computer with AOL dial-up. So my son Mark had quite a bit of an advantage on his peers. He was 11 at the time, and here he is with his own computer, the ability to learn how to make computers talk to other computers, because we had 8 computers, printers, scanners, everything on the network, and a little bit of a head start on his colleagues. So it was kind of like a perfect storm that created the incubation for what became, the big social network that we all know about today is Facebook. In fact, I think it was in 96, I was looking for a way to increase inter-office communication. And I brought in the Comlight people to, pitch their system to me with lights that go in each room, so you could have different sequences and combination of lights to allow different messages, like one light for the hygienist needs an exam, one light that your next patient is waiting, things of that nature. And I was talking about it during our what happened in your day discussion at dinner that I had with the family. And Mark looked at me and said, that's going to involve running, new wires into all your treatment rooms and stuff like that and be pretty expensive. And I go, well, yeah. And he said, you don't need that. You've already got computers in all your treatment rooms that already have capable of talking to each other. He goes, I can write you a software program that will allow your computers to talk to each other. So he did. I think it took him a couple of nights, and it was a little buggy, but it worked. And we had a system that we dubbed ZuckNet that was essentially the first social network in the world, have you, and that we used for the front desk to send pop-up messages to me about my next patient being here, or they've been waiting 10 minutes and they're pacing, or the hygienist needs an exam and whatnot. And we never took it commercial, but it kind of tipped us off that this kid had a lot of talent. And one of the things my wife and I both learned, my being a dentist, her being a physician, we had a lot of parental influence to steer us into a career, whether it was our passion or not. You were smart kid growing up in New York, the be all and end all was to become a doctor. So
right,
it's kind of like our lives were predestined for us. And even though I was very happy with my career, and my wife had no complaints, it may not have been the passion that we would have found on our own, left to our own devices. And I think the biggest thing we changed in parenting from what our parents did to us is we wanted our kids to find their own passions and support them. So, with one kid, it was music and entertainment and theater. With another, it was computers. With another, it was reading and supporting, that. So that enabled us to, really help our children have the freedom to develop into careers that they were passionate about and could enjoy. And I feel that leads to not only a happier, but a more productive person. So,
I could not agree more. And unfortunately, there's no playbook to how to be a parent, right? We figure it out by doing it and using our common sense.
Yeah.
And I have two daughters, so I totally understand. One is just started university, so I totally understand. When they were younger, we were like forcing them. When they were 4 or 5 years, you need to do piano. But then I realized they hated certain things and they love certain things. And my daughter, she got into robotics, and she's into tech, and I studied computer science. So maybe, like you said, the parents have an influence, and I think what they're around, the environment they're in, influences who they become. And you're right. Like when I was growing up, my mom wanted me to be a doctor, but I just didn't like it, and I somehow became a computer science or computer engineer. But thank you for sharing this. This is wonderful. The other thing that I got from so far everything you said is we can design our own life. Many people. I love that Steve Jobs speech at Stanford. He talks about creating a life that you want to live, not what somebody else is living. And in dentistry, not too many people have the courage to do what you did, which is for you, family was important. So, having the store, so to speak, below the house, and, creating an environment where you can do both really well, and having those long lunches with your wife. All those are wonderful ideas, but not everyone leverages those. Maybe the younger generation more so than the older generation. I think in your age group, maybe you are like somebody unique in kind of designing something you wanted. Anyways, any comments on that? Any feedback on that? Like, what do you notice? Any advice?
Well, my practice career was launched in a different economic climate, obviously, than today. NYU was 3 years of dental school. I went to a free college, the City University in New York, Brooklyn College. So I think my 3 years of dental education cost about $20,000 total, including my equipment kit. Whereas I think the entering class at good private dental schools, are 6 figures now.
$500,000, debt.
Yeah. So when it came time to finally sell my practice, which kind of happened kind of suddenly. Our kids were dispersing. Mark moved out to California in 2004 just to start Facebook, and about a year and a half later, he dragged Randy out with him, my oldest daughter, who graduated from Harvard and was working for Ogilvy and Mather, and then Forbes, and in marketing. And he brought her out to become the head of marketing at Facebook. And then our middle daughter was at University of Chicago, ultimately wound up at Princeton for a PhD program. So she was on the East Coast. And then our youngest daughter, Ariel, went out to Claremont McKenna in Southern California for college. So we had 3 kids in California. So we obviously that's where we vacation, spend time with the kids in California. But it wasn't until Randy had our first grandchild in 2011 that thoughts of relocating out to California really occurred. And holding that first grandchild, my wife looked at me and said, "I'm coming. I'm staying. Are you coming?" That kind of thing. And I'm going, well, yeah, I mean, I know that's the plan, but we do have the matter of this house we own in New York with a dental office in it. And, so we started the transition process, and, I had some very good associates that would have loved to buy the practice and the house, and the actuarial numbers made terrific sense. I mean, I had one guy who was, I think he was probably earning a couple $100,000 a year as a salaried dentist. And my accountant showed how he could handle the notes on the mortgage on the house and the note on the practice, still clear the same net income he was clearing as an associate, and yet build equity in practice ownership and the house. And we had a frank talk, and he said to me, "I can't do it. I can't up here do it. I've got $300,000 or $400,000 in debt already from college and dental school, and I can't sign my name to more paper. I just can't bring myself to do it," even though it made sense. And I was like, well, let me get this in my head straight, because I want to understand the psyche of, of the dentists of the day. Did you really entertain that much of an expense in establishing your career and going into debt to then become an employee and not an entrepreneur? And so that, I think, is the biggest difference in the climate today, is that, with the advent of, you have DSOs buying up a lot of practices. Many dentists who consider themselves to be in private practice really are employees of insurance companies who, because they accept PPOs from them, the insurance companies are dictating the fees. Their fees are 60 to 70% of what they should be. And so in essence, you're not a true entrepreneur, because if you're not able to set your own fees and determine the practice in the manner you want to, if you can't run a high-end quality practice with top employees and top equipment because you can't afford to, based on your salaries being dictated by an insurance company, then why bother? So I like, when I have a young person who's interested in a career in dentistry, I like to get, engage them in conversation and find out what their career goals, and make sure they're aware of the impediments, in the path to the idealistic practice that they may have in mind.
Makes sense. So you're saying perhaps it's just the debt, and because that was not something they thought of before they went into the career, that kind of perhaps makes people take less risks as entrepreneurs and maybe choose careers like being an associate or a DSO and so forth. Maybe when you went in, when you started, you didn't have that $500,000 debt. So you are willing to, try something, to buy that machine.
Yeah, I mean, I did have some student loans to pay back, but I think they totaled about $100 a month for 10 years. So it was quite manageable. And it allowed me to, the first dental practice I bought was $5,000. And then the practice component, when we bought a house in Dobbs Ferry in 1981, the house was $135,000 and the practice component was $7,500. Ultimately, I think 5 years later, we bought another practice from a retiring dentist to acquire his equipment and patients for $20,000. I mean, those are numbers that today's dentists can't relate to.
Right.
Now that's lock, stock, and barrel practices, everything.
Right.
So it was a different world that I came into, and I'll never forget going to one of my daughter's volleyball games, and my daughter went to a pretty elite private high school, and there were some very, very wealthy parents, much wealthier than dentists.
Fair enough.
And he was a guy who was in the same age group and grew up in the same environment in Brooklyn that my wife and I kind of grew up in, and I remember my wife saying to his wife that she really admired him breaking the mold, so to speak, and not following the traditional path of becoming a doctor or a lawyer. He went into real estate, was ultra successful. And the wife laughed and said he went into real estate because he was too stupid to get into medical or dental school. So, I think that the one good thing, I think a lot of people, I went to dental school not knowing anything about it, to be honest. I didn't have a parent who was a dentist. My dad was a postal worker. My mom was a homemaker and a secretary. But I think of the 200 students that were in my class at NYU Dental, 100 of them, like 50%, had parents who were dentists. So it was just expected they were going to go to dental school, and they probably had practices to step right into, which certainly makes it a lot easier and a lot more sense financially. But my first day of dental school, I heard some upperclassmen talking about a bridge, and I didn't know if they were talking about the Brooklyn Bridge or the Verrazano Bridge. I didn't know anything about dentistry. I was guided into a career in dentistry, like I said, preconditioned, smart doctor, that kind of thing. So, but nowadays, the decision of a career and return on the investment in a career and the style of living certainly has to come into consideration. I think what will also happen, which is a good thing, is that the people going into dentistry will be making more of an informed decision as a career choice than someone like I did. And even though it worked out really well for me, hopefully we can have people going into dentistry who are passionate about dentistry from the get-go. This is their chosen career. I knew one kid who admitted to me that since the time he was 8 years old, he always wanted to be an oral surgeon. And that's great, if you have that,
Right.
mindset from a child. But, I don't remember from my dental experience as a kid looking at that and saying, I want to do that when I grow up, that kind of thing. So, there's a lot goes into a career. And I think the other thing the other thing I want to talk about for maybe for young dentists who are listening in here, or people in dental school or considering a career in dental education, is that if you want the kind of career that I had, which is as a business owner and an entrepreneur, dental school doesn't prepare you for that. I think that, the future of dentistry holds some sort of combined MBA, DDS, DMD degree, or else it's incumbent upon dentists to maybe have a strong business background prior to going to dental school. Maybe get your MBA before going to dental school after college, or, a combined BA, BS, MBA degree prior to dental school, because you are becoming a business person when you own your own practice. And there's so much to know that you will not be prepared for in dental school.
Absolutely. Coming back to what you were just saying, like I meet a lot of young dentists, and not all of them, but many of them go through a phase where they're disillusioned. In other words, they're at the top of the class, they killed it, and that's why they got into any kind of becoming a doctor, right? Now they're told they're not good enough. I mean, in some sense, like, because the bar is so high, because all the people they look up to is like they're perfect in their techniques and everything else. And then they come back with this, they spend 10 years of their life in medical school, dental school, and then they come back with a debt and feeling like they're not good enough and they don't know how to make it. So they go through that phase, and it's a very lonely phase, because we don't talk about our problems. You look at a Facebook post, it's how wonderful our life is, right? So they go through that phase, and I don't know if that's something that happened when you were growing up or when you were practicing, or is it just a little bit more so now because of the way things are?
There's always people in the profession who are out there talking and speaking about what they do, and we look up to them, and like you said, you think they're perfect or gurus or something that we're not, but the reality is they're not. They're the same as us. Most of us are just as good, if not better, practitioners than them. They just have a gift of being able to talk, or they enjoy, or something serendipitous happened in their career to make them become the apparent guru. I'm sure some of them are really
Good.
another stratosphere. I consider myself to be an excellent dentist, but yet I never considered myself to be on the level that I wanted to teach my other experienced colleagues dentistry. I wasn't so lofty of my opinion of myself that I thought that, hey, I can teach other people who are doing the same thing as me to be better, because I'm so great. But on the other hand, you kind of know certain things happen in your career. Like, I think the first thing that opened my eyes was when my dental lab guy called me up and asked me if he and his family could come to my office as patients.
Mm.
And I thought, hey, they're seeing impression work and clinical work in their laboratory from a lot of different dentists. And that's really flattering that he chose me and wants to come to me. He obviously, in talking to him over the phone, about cases and just physically seeing my preparations and things of that nature, he's somehow able to determine that I'm skilled, above my peers.
Could you try
And
again?
then, I guess when the work you do doesn't fall out and doesn't need replacing, and, you kind of say, hey, I'm pretty good. That crown that I put in 20 years, still looks great, and just a couple of years ago, my office manager at the practice where I worked for over 30 years in Dobbs Ferry is still at the office with the dentist who took over the practice from me. And she sent me an x-ray and a hello from a patient who's now 98 years old, who I placed an implant on back in 1988. So that's like, 25, almost 20.
No, no, it's 30
Yeah, 30 years ago. 30 years ago, I trained under Dr. Jerry Nisnik, and I was placing Corvent implants in the 80s. And this was one of my first Corvent implants, something that no one today would do. The patient hated a distal extension partial denture. And so I placed a single implant in the number 30 area and made a 3-unit bridge to a crown on number 28. So you never, connect a crown, natural crown to an implanted tooth without some kind of stress breaker. But we didn't know anything about that back then. We just kind of were pioneers doing that stuff. And here's that 3-unit bridge, she sent me the x-ray of 3 years ago that looks, I pulled out the old x-ray, it looks the same 30 years later, and the patient's 97 years old, still functioning well on that bridge. So, things happen in your career that you kind of know you're a good dentist. I think the most important thing is that the patients, obviously hear stories from their friends, about stuff that hurt or things fall out or they don't look good and stuff like that. So we know we're good, but the vast majority of dentists are great dentists. And we all have certain things that we excel in that maybe it's great to share with our colleagues. And, look at what happened to me. In 2010, I got a phone call from Howard Ferran, the founder of Dentaltown.
Yes.
And 2 years prior, Facebook had opened up to businesses for business pages.
Right.
And Howard was not really up to snuff with Facebook, although he had essentially the Townie boards were essentially the first social network for dentists,
right,
well before Facebook. So Howard was a pioneer in his own right. And Howard had a problem, and I guess he read somewhere that Mark's dad was a dentist, and he called me up and he said, Ed, I want to be friends with every dentist in the world, and Facebook won't let me have any more friends. So, I figured out that as a business page, you can have unlimited followers. And what Howard had done is set up a personal page as his business page, essentially. And so Facebook caps out personal profiles at 5,000 friends. And he got a notice that he couldn't have any more friends. And I said to him, Howard, you set it up incorrectly. We need to get you on a business page, and then you can have millions of dentists around the world. And he said, can you help me do that, Ed? And I said, sure. So, I assisted him with it. And he said, Ed, you need to write an article. Does my office need a Facebook page?
Right.
And so I think it was in September 2010 of Dentaltown. There's that article. And it was very well received. And he said, you got to write another article. That was great. It was really well received. So I wrote an article about technology, integrating technology in the dental practice, something else I was passionate about. I wasn't about to write articles on how to do a crown or something like that.
So your passion is technology. So you gravitated towards how do we apply social media technology.
From those two articles in Dentaltown, I started getting inquiries to speak at dental schools, at Academy of General Dentistry meetings, then at dental conferences, then study clubs and whatnot. And then from there, companies that became aware of my technological expertise started asking for advice. So I launched into the next phase of my career, which was advising startups in the medical dental field, on how to grow their companies, how to, look at things through the eyes of how the people who are going to purchase their product look at them. And while many of these were really interesting and fascinating to me, like robotics in dentistry, doing crown preps, smart toothbrushes that give all kinds of data on patients' brushing habits, artificial intelligence to read dental x-rays, all kinds of great stuff. This year in particular, I'm now sitting on something that I think may be the biggest thing that may hit dentistry in the foreseeable future. And that's realizing that the etiology of most of the major maladies that affect mankind, and I'm talking heart disease, strokes, atherosclerotic or cardiometabolic diseases like diabetes, Alzheimer's disease, cancers of the digestive tract, colorectal cancer, oral cancer, pancreatic cancer, things of that nature, all have their origins in the bacteria Porphyromonas gingivalis, commonly known to dentists as P. gingivalis, in periodontal disease. And while this has been studied since 1950, there have literally been thousands of articles written about P. gingivalis. All dentists know, any dentist can tell you, even though some physicians may be skeptical, that gum disease leads to all these major maladies, but no one really quite understands the process. And that's partly because when there's an hypothesis such that gum disease, for example, is a major implicator or major etiology of Alzheimer's disease, they want to know where. Show me the bacteria P. gingivalis in the brain. And it's not there. You won't find P. gingivalis in the brain. P. gingivalis is a gram-negative anaerobic organism that survives in places with very low oxygen tension, like the deep gum crevices of a periodontal pocket in the biofilm. It's a really complex organism that pulls DNA from other organisms that it meets and, coexists with in the biofilm. So these conditions are ripe for P. gingivalis to thrive in periodontal disease. And in addition to the destruction that it causes locally in causing, tooth loss and bone disease and periimplantitis and all kinds of other things in the mouth, it's implicated in all these diseases at distant portions of the body and organ diseases. But the researchers are confused. How does it do it? So the company I'm working with now, Keystone Bio, has determined, and there was a paper last month's, I think it was the August 15th issue of the Journal of Alzheimer's Disease, that shows the pathway where the organism P. gingivalis actually has these outer membrane vesicles, little particles that are sent throughout the bloodstream that cause all these maladies. They carry the toxic proteins to distant parts of the body. Now, the brain is part of an encased system that protects it from the onslaught of most bacteria. We call it the blood-brain barrier. And the blood-brain barrier is relatively impermeable to most bacteria. Meningitis or meningococcal disease is one of the organisms that can cross the blood-brain barrier, which is why we hear of outbreaks of meningitis sometimes that kill people within a couple of days, why they're so serious. But P. gingivalis itself, the organism, can't cross the blood-brain barrier. And as such, that means that they cannot invade the brain directly. Also, the brain has one of the highest oxygen tensions anywhere in the body. Not a place for an organism that thrives in low oxygen tension situations. So you wouldn't expect P. gingivalis to be there. And yet these outer membrane vesicles, which carry the toxic proteins, which are shown to cause the advanced Alzheimer's disease and destruction of the neuronal transmission in the brain, those outer membrane vesicles have been shown to decrease the permeability of the blood-brain barrier, allow them to penetrate, and that's why, that's how P. gingivalis, spreads its toxic proteins into the brain.
So it doesn't, you don't see the bacteria, but you see the proteins.
Exactly, the toxic proteins that are a result of it. And in heart disease, they cause increased permeability of the vessel walls. They cause increased calcification, which leads to atherosclerotic disease, stone formation that impinges on the coronary arteries, on the arteries to the brain that can cause stroke. They also will wreak havoc with the pancreas and the pancreas's ability to detect glucose levels, because they break that they affect the breakdown, the body's breakdown of glycogen into products that the body can then utilize and digest. So you have higher elevations out of whack of blood sugar than the pancreas can realize. And so doctors trying to treat patients with diabetes have difficulty controlling it.
Makes sense. Makes sense.
So Keystone Bio has a therapy that can actually eradicate P. gingivalis. There's nothing else like it in the world. There are other companies working on the P. gingivalis cycle of causing Alzheimer's disease, but no one is focused on eliminating the bacteria at its source in the mouth. And we hope within a couple of years to have an adjunctive treatment to scaling and root planing. Because right now, dentists can remove the biofilm, scale and root plane, and within a couple of weeks, you have colonies of P. gingivalis and all its cohorts repopulating those pockets again. But if we can scale, remove the biofilm, and inject a gel into the pockets that will keep P. gingivalis from repopulating for up to a year, now we have a therapy that dentists will now be able, it'll only be administered by dentists, and we will be on the front line of preventing all of these major diseases that plague mankind.
That's amazing. So what's the process? I mean, do they have to get FDA approved, or like how does it become,
Yes, so it's interesting because the biologic that they are working with was actually tested in studies in the UK in the mid 1990s. But at the time, the researchers were looking for something that would permanently cure and eradicate PG on a permanent basis. And so when they followed up with a lot of these people a year later and found PG populations had, reacclimated, they considered it a failure and they abandoned the treatment until the current team of Keystone Bio picked up on these studies and said, hey, a permanent treatment is not possible. But right now we've got 9 days, which is nothing after biofilm removal before we recolonize. If we can prevent it from coming back, for 9 months to a year, and dentists can reinstitute and redo the therapy, much like a lot of dentists are now working with Arrestin, which is also an injectable medicine that we inject into the pockets of people with gum disease. But Arrestin is minocycline, is really focused only on other bacteria that are not as harmful. They're not the bad boys of periodontal disease led by P. gingivalis. And so they're not going to have the desired effect that Keystone Bio's therapy will have. So there's initially the first test is a safety and efficacy test, which essentially was already done in 1995. So we expect that to go very quickly. And then once that safety and efficacy is established from the first trial, then they essentially branch out into other trials for the individual maladies, because you can't make a claim that this is effective against Alzheimer's disease unless you have a study specifically on patients where you're studying either onset or progression of Alzheimer's disease.
Right.
And another study for patients with diabetes, and another for patients with heart disease, and another evaluating digestive cancers and liver disease and many of the major maladies that have already been clinically shown to be correlated with P. gingivalis related gum disease. And I mean, this is a huge part of the population. 50% of all adults in the world age 30 and over have some form of periodontal disease. Right. And when you talk age 65 and up, you're now over 70%. So we're on to something huge.
Do you think these studies that, the specific studies would take months, years? I mean, when do you think it'll become available to dentists?
It's hard to put a definite date on it. The studies are actually going to be being done in Australia because the climate for fast tracking in Australia is better than the one here in the US, and the FDA accepts Australian trials and test results. But still, I think best case scenario is this is not a tool or a medication that dentists will have in their arsenal for a couple of years at least. But right now we have an awareness problem. People don't understand or don't know what P. gingivalis is. P. gingivalis needs to become a household four-letter word, like cancer. And I think it's up to us as dental professionals and our medical colleagues also to start the process of educating patients, to create awareness. It'll do two positive things. One, it'll get patients to really understand more than just saying, hey, gum disease causes heart disease or gum disease causes Alzheimer's. Now we're giving a name to it. We can definitively show, and we have studies that show that P. gingivalis is the bad boy of this, and this is how it does it. Once they understand that, they're going to say, well, how do we get rid of P. gingivalis in my mouth? And so for one, the dentist is going to say, hey, you've got to get on a program of scaling and root planing, regularly, and professional maintenance visits. And people are going to be more likely to accept the treatment plan and more likely to adhere to a strict 3-month maintenance program if they understand what the disease is all about.
Right.
And by understanding that there will be a therapy coming down the pike, they will more readily accept the therapy later on when it is available to them. Instead of dentists now having to say, hey, there's this bacteria, blah, blah. Oh yeah, I know all about that. You've got that drug, I want it, scale me and shoot that sucker in my pockets, we've got to do this. In addition, we're also working on a vaccine to give to young people. And so now if you can give vaccine to young people who have not had a chance to establish gum disease, we can now prevent in a 1-dose vaccine P. gingivalis from ever taking foothold in the body. So
wow.
That means for the next generation, less Alzheimer's, less heart disease, less diabetes, less, everything.
That can be huge. I mean, that can be
unbelievable.
Yeah.
Unbelievable.
I'm going to put a link to the website, the company you're talking about, and Keystone Bio. Any other information you could share? Perhaps can you send us some resources or anything else that you think dentists should look at?
So I just actually completed a 3-lecture series with Dental Cast Productions.
Yes.
So dentists can visit the Dental Cast Productions Facebook page.
I know the gentleman who runs it, so I'll get the links from him, or you could send it to us.
John Stamper is a great guy.
Right.
I was actually the first guest in their digital learning series. They're going to have a variety of interesting dental people speaking in groups of 3 lectures like I did. There'll be links. I think there are links already up there to my 3-lecture series on YouTube that can be found on the Dental Cast Productions Facebook page and on my own Facebook page as well, Painless Social Media.
Okay. We'll find that and we'll share it. And perhaps if anybody has any questions, can they contact you, Dr. Zuckerburg?
Yeah, absolutely. Best way you can reach out to me either on my Painless Social Media Facebook page and direct message me there, or you can reach out to me through an inquiry form on my website, painlessdrz.com.
Perfect. I'm going to get all of this and add some resources and share it later on. So we'll create some graphics, some interesting resources. I mean, I loved talking to you. Any final thoughts before we wrap up? Any advice for the younger dentists, younger and mid-aged dentists who are, busy, doing everything you did?
If you've already chosen dentistry as a career and you're in it, as I mentioned before, make sure that your business administration skills are up there with your clinical skills. Marketing, things that dentists were not taught to do. When I in the old days, if I just put in a veneer case and the patient loved their new smile and they would be ecstatic, almost bring tears to their eyes, and they couldn't thank me enough. And in those days, I would just think to myself, good job, Ed, you're probably going to get paid on this case, Nowadays, pull out your iPhone or your phone and say, hey, I'm so glad you love the work we did for us and you love us. Would you mind giving us a video testimonial? And use that kind of what we call, UGC or user-generated content to help market your practice and your website, on social media or whatnot. Great reviews from your patients. It's marketing and really understanding the business end of dentistry is really critical for your success in dentistry.
I'm sure we can talk more, Dr. Zuckerburg. I really appreciate your time today, and perhaps we could have you back one of these days. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much. We'll include all the links and we'll share it with our audience. We have thousands of dentists who are part of the community, so we would share all of this. Thank you so much. And I also want to take a moment to thank our listeners for their time and attention. And if you love this, conversation, share it with your friends. We'll be creating short video clips, so perhaps you could share the clips. Dr. Zuckerburg today gave us a lot of insights. He was just giving us pointers that I think would help a lot of people. So thank you so much for that.
Great being here, Naren. Thanks.
Thank you.